You've been playing by rules that were designed for you to lose. Every morning you wake up, follow the procedures, respect the hierarchy, wait your turn like a good citizen. And every evening you watch someone else, someone less qualified, less ethical, less deserving, walk through doors that remain locked to you. This isn't an accident. This is architecture. The system isn't broken. It's working exactly as intended, just not for you. Let me ask you something they taught you never to ask. What if morality is just a cage for the obedient? What if the virtues you've been clutching like a life raft are actually the weights dragging you to the bottom? Niccolò Machiavelli understood this 5 centuries ago, when he wrote that the gap between how people actually live and how they ought to live is so wide that anyone who ignores reality in favor of ideals is learning how to destroy himself, not preserve himself. He wasn't celebrating corruption. He was documenting the operating system of power. And that operating system hasn't changed. It's only gotten better at hiding itself. You know the graveyard I'm talking about? The honest man's graveyard. It's filled with people who did everything right and got nothing for it. The whistleblower who exposed fraud and became unemployable. The manager who refused to cook the books and watched his career flatline while his compromised colleague got promoted. The entrepreneur who wouldn't bribe the inspector and lost everything to a competitor who understood that permits aren't really about safety, they're about who pays. These people haunt the margins of every industry, every institution, every hierarchy. They're the ghosts of merit-based thinking, and their epitaphs all read the same. But I followed the rules. The rules. Let's talk about the rules. You've been following them religiously, haven't you? Show up early. Document everything. Never burn bridges. Wait for recognition. Trust the process. And what has this devotion earned you? You've watched the promotion go to the person who took credit for your work. You've seen the contract awarded to the company that wined and dined the decision-maker while you submitted the superior proposal. You've observed the shameless self-promoter leap over you on the ladder while you quietly delivered excellence, believing that quality speaks for itself. It doesn't. Quality whispers, leverage shouts. Here's what's burning inside you. The resentment you're not supposed to acknowledge. You're being punished for being good. Not good at your job. You're excellent at that. Good as in ethical, principled, honest. You're suffering from what I call the naive tax, and you're paying it every single day. While you agonize over the right thing to do, others are simply doing what works. While you're playing checkers with the official rulebook open, they're playing 3-dimensional chess with rules you didn't know existed. And they're winning. Not because they're smarter, because they're unencumbered by the illusions you're still carrying. The most dangerous lie you've been told is that success follows a meritocratic formula. Work hard, develop skills, demonstrate value, receive rewards. This is a children's story, a fairy tale for adults. The actual formula is far more primal. Understand the system's true incentives. Position yourself in the flow of resources, accumulate leverage, deploy that leverage strategically. Merit is what they tell you matters. Leverage is what actually matters. And in a corrupt system, the primary form of leverage is the willingness to operate by the system's real rules rather than its advertised ones. Machiavelli observed that a prince who wants to maintain his power must learn how not to be good, and to use that knowledge or not use it according to necessity. Read that again. Learn how not to be good, not become evil for its own sake. Learn the full spectrum of options that morality removes from your toolkit, then deploy them strategically. This is the hidden curriculum. This is what separates those who complain about the game from those who win it. Every system selects for the behaviors it rewards. A corrupt system, by definition, rewards corrupt behavior. This isn't a moral judgment. It's evolutionary logic. If an organization promotes people who manipulate rather than produce, it will fill with manipulators. If a market advantages those who cut corners, corner cutting becomes the dominant strategy. If a political structure empowers those willing to lie convincingly, it will be governed by convincing liars. You can be outraged by this, or you can understand it. Outrage is expensive. Understanding is profitable. You think you're standing on principle, but what you're actually doing is unilateral disarmament. You've decided to fight with one hand tied behind your back while your opponents use every weapon available. You call this integrity. They call it opportunity. And the system doesn't care what you call it. The system simply processes the results. It sees that you're self-limiting, and it routes around you like water flowing past a rock. You become an obstacle to efficiency rather than a participant in success. Consider the corruption spectrum. It's not a binary choice between sainthood and villainy. It's a gradient, and everyone is somewhere on it. The person who calls in sick when they're not. The executive who massages the quarterly numbers. The academic who plagiarizes a paragraph. The politician who trades a vote for a favor. The difference isn't that some people are corrupt and others aren't. The difference is that some people have calibrated their corruption to their ambitions, while others are still pretending the spectrum doesn't exist. You've been making compromises your entire life. You've just been making small ones that don't advance your position. That's not virtue. That's inefficiency. Here's what keeps you trapped. Guilt. Guilt is the enforcement mechanism of a moral system, and in a corrupt environment, it functions as a tool of control. Those who weaponize guilt never feel it themselves. They've recognized it for what it is, a psychological restraint that keeps potential competitors hobbled. They will invoke your conscience, appeal to your fairness, remind you of your principles, not because they share those principles, because your principles are their advantage. Every time you hesitate on ethical grounds, someone without those grounds is moving forward. They're not smarter than you. They're just unweighted. Machiavelli's insight cuts deeper than simple cynicism. He understood that in a world where others act without moral constraint, your constraint becomes your vulnerability. The honest man in a den of thieves doesn't elevate the environment. He gets robbed. The ethical player in a rigged game doesn't reform the game. He loses. This isn't an argument for becoming a monster. It's a recognition that the monsters are already here. They're already playing. And they're counting on your reluctance to level the field. Now let's go deeper into what Machiavelli actually understood about the mechanics of corruption. Because this is where most people get it catastrophically wrong. They think corruption is about becoming evil. It's not. It's about understanding that systems create incentive structures, and those structures determine behavior far more powerfully than individual morality ever could. Machiavelli didn't celebrate corruption. He diagnosed it. He looked at the political machinery of Renaissance Italy and recognized a brutal truth. The system itself was the pathogen, and those who refused to develop immunity didn't become heroes. They became casualties, strategic corruption versus chaotic corruption. This distinction separates those who wield power from those who are destroyed by it. Chaotic corruption is what amateurs do. It's reactive, emotional, short-sighted. It's the bureaucrat who takes a bribe without considering the leverage it creates against him. It's the executive who lies without tracking who knows the truth. It's corruption without architecture, without strategy, without endgame. These people don't win. They simply compromise themselves into vulnerability. But strategic corruption, that's entirely different. That's understanding which rules can be bent, which must be broken, and which must be publicly defended even as you privately circumvent them. It's corruption with a blueprint. Machiavelli's entire framework rests on this calculated approach. He never advocated for random deception. He advocated for purposeful deception in service of sustainable power. Here's the paradox that destroys most people who try to play this game without understanding it. You must appear virtuous while acting pragmatically. Not sometimes, always. Machiavelli was explicit about this. The appearance of morality is more valuable than morality itself because perception governs how others respond to your power. If you appear corrupt, even your legitimate actions will be questioned. If you appear virtuous, even your corrupt actions will be rationalized by observers who need to believe in your goodness. This is why the most successful operators in corrupt systems are often those who speak most eloquently about ethics. They understand that moral language is a form of camouflage. They drape themselves in the vocabulary of principle while their actions follow the logic of power. The amateur thinks this is hypocrisy. The strategist recognizes it as operational necessity. Before you write in the comments that this is too dark, that I am advocating for something dangerous. Understand what's actually being said here. This is description, not prescription. These dynamics exist whether you acknowledge them or not. Write in the comments which concept challenges you most, because your resistance to these ideas is itself data about how the system has conditioned you. Your discomfort is evidence of successful socialization into a game where your compliance benefits others. Let's talk about moral arbitrage. This is the practice of using others' ethics against them while maintaining your own flexibility. It's one of the most powerful tools in any corrupt system, and it's everywhere once you learn to see it. Here's how it works. You identify someone who is genuinely committed to a moral principle, honesty, fairness, loyalty, whatever. That commitment is now a lever. You can predict their behavior because they've constrained themselves. They've announced their limitations. Meanwhile, you express sympathy for that same principle. You speak its language. You mirror their values in your presentation. But you don't actually bind yourself to it. When the critical moment comes, when there's a choice between the principle and the advantage, they choose the principle. You choose the advantage. And because you've been speaking their language, because you've positioned yourself as an ally to their values, they often don't see it coming until it's too late. Machiavelli understood this intimately. He wrote that a prince must learn to be able not to be good, and to use this and not use it according to necessity. That's moral arbitrage. The ability to invoke morality when it serves you and abandon it when it constrains you, all while maintaining the appearance of consistency. The corruption threshold. Every person has one, whether they admit it or not. It's the calculation, usually unconscious, of what they're willing to compromise for what level of gain or survival. Most people lie to themselves about where this threshold sits. They tell themselves they'd never cross certain lines, right up until the moment the cost of not crossing becomes unbearable. The sophisticated operator doesn't deny having a threshold. They map it consciously. They ask themselves the uncomfortable questions in advance. What would I actually do if my career depended on a lie? What would I sacrifice if my family's security required it? What rules would I break if the alternative was irrelevance? This isn't about having no morality. It's about having honest morality instead of performed morality. And here's what Machiavelli recognized that most people can't accept. The system is designed to gradually move your threshold. It starts with small compromises, tiny deviations that seem reasonable in context. Each one makes the next slightly easier. This isn't accidental. Corrupt systems survive by slowly acclimating participants to increasing levels of corruption. By the time you've crossed lines you once considered sacred, you've also invested too much to walk away. You're complicit, you're captured, and the system knows it. Power dynamics decoded. Why does the system protect those who master its shadow rules? Because they become the system's immune system. They're the ones who understand how it actually functions beneath the official narrative. They know where the bodies are buried because they helped bury them. They know which rules are theater and which are enforced because they've tested the boundaries. The system can't afford to expose them without exposing itself. This creates a protection racket. Once you're sufficiently embedded in the corrupt mechanics, you become too dangerous to punish. Your knowledge is leverage. Your complicity is insurance. Machiavelli saw this in the courts and councils of Italy. The most secure positions belonged not to the most virtuous, but to those who knew too much to be discarded. They'd become structural. Remove them, and the architecture of deception collapses. The invisible handshake. There are agreements that govern real success that are never written down, never explicitly stated, never acknowledged in public. These are the actual rules. You'll never find them in an employee handbook or a legal code. They're transmitted through implication, through pattern recognition, through watching what gets rewarded versus what gets punished, regardless of what gets praised. The invisible handshake is the mutual understanding among those who've learned the real game, that certain things will never be discussed openly, that certain protections will be extended, that certain transgressions will be overlooked as long as certain appearances are maintained. This is how corrupt systems achieve stability, not through conspiracy in the dramatic sense, but through emergent coordination among those who've independently discovered the same truths about how power actually works. Machiavelli didn't need to attend secret meetings to understand this. He simply watched who rose and who fell, then reverse-engineered the actual selection criteria. Here's a dark psychological principle that operates at the core of every corrupt system. Guilt is a tool of control, and those who weaponize it never feel it themselves. Think about how this works. The system promotes moral language constantly. It's everywhere. Integrity, honor, fairness, justice. These concepts are invoked relentlessly. Why? Because guilt is one of the most effective mechanisms for controlling behavior. If you can make people feel guilty for pursuing their interests, for questioning authority, for breaking rules that others break with impunity, you've installed an internal police force. They'll regulate themselves. They'll hold themselves back. They'll sacrifice their own advancement to maintain their self-image as good people. Meanwhile, those who've recognized guilt as a control mechanism rather than a moral reality simply don't experience it the same way. They've performed a kind of psychological surgery on themselves. They've removed the implant. They can invoke moral language to control others while remaining immune to it themselves. This is what Machiavelli meant when he discussed the necessity of learning to enter into evil when forced by necessity. It's not about becoming sadistic. It's about becoming immune to the guilt that would otherwise paralyze you in situations where power requires actions that morality condemns. Let's be precise about what we're actually discussing here. This isn't a guide to becoming a sociopath. Sociopaths are actually quite bad at navigating corrupt systems long-term because they can't maintain the appearance of empathy convincingly. They overplay their hand. They create too many enemies. They lack the patience for strategic corruption. What we're examining is something more disturbing because it's more common. It's how normal people with functioning empathy adapt to corrupt environments. They don't lose their capacity for guilt. They compartmentalize it. They develop sophisticated rationalizations. They tell themselves stories about necessity, about the greater good, about how they'll use their power virtuously once they have enough of it. These narratives aren't necessarily lies. They're coping mechanisms that allow fundamentally social beings to operate in antisocial systems without experiencing complete psychological breakdown. The Machiavellian insight here is that this adaptation is predictable. The system doesn't need to recruit monsters. It just needs to create conditions where monster-like behavior becomes rational for non-monsters, where the cost of ethics exceeds what most people can afford to pay, where virtue becomes a luxury that only the already powerful or the irrelevant can maintain. Once you understand this, you see it everywhere. In corporations where good people implement policies they privately oppose because their mortgage depends on it. In governments where idealistic officials gradually become indistinguishable from the corruption they entered to fight. In institutions where everyone individually regrets the collective direction, but no one individual has the leverage to change it without sacrificing themselves pointlessly. This is the true corruption. Not individual evil, but systemic conditions that make evil rational. And Machiavelli's darkest lesson? Once you see this clearly, you face an impossible choice. Refuse to adapt and accept irrelevance, or adapt and accept complicity. There is no third option that doesn't require either exceptional power or exceptional sacrifice. Most people have neither.